Okay, thank you all. Welcome to the third installment, the Module 3 of Balancing Building Performance, Risk, and Reward. Um, let's see, there we go. Some of you, I think, have attended the first two, and just a reminder that all of these will be available. The first one is up now. We're working on the others. Pre-design, design, and today we're going to be talking about construction documents and administration. And we'll be reviewing some spec language and some Division 1 requirements, RFI procedures, project turnover, commissioning, and post-occupancy considerations. I am Allison Johnson. I'll let the other two introduce themselves.
I'm Monica Landrino,
Our Director of Sustainability, and
Sorry, I had to find the mute button. Donovan Olive, General Counsel with HOK.
okay, thank you all. So we've done this now. This is the third time we're reviewing this, but I did want to clarify one thing. So we adopted the BEPS in 2020, preemptively. There was a benchmarking ordinance passed in 2017 that really gave us the data so that this thing could, it was the pre-law. That's not a legal term. Donovan,
the
don't do it.
foundation on which benchmarking is, or
Right.
performance standards are based. Really, you have to collect the data and create
We
a
had to,
infrastructure for
yeah, had to get started in order for this to be passed. So we then passed, collective we, passed the BEPS in 2020, and our first cycle ends in 2025. But the one clarification, and I think it was Katrina that really like hammered this in my head, it was helpful, is that it is due in 2025 in May, but it's based on the year before that. So it's really the data from 2024 that will be collected and you'll be benchmarked against, which means next year, 2023 is when we need to be making improvements on that 65% of buildings that don't meet the current BEPS requirements so that they can, move beyond that line in the sand, that threshold, which I'll show you in just a second. So it's coming. It's critical that we are all informed and understand how all of this works. And then the cycle 2 basically will be started based on those numbers in 2026 is another way to look at it. But you can see the timeline and to really understand, yes, it ends in May of 2025, but it's 2024's numbers that will be reported in May. And then in 2026, we'll know what the next cycle is based on. And this is what I meant by the line in the sand. You know, we are being compared, all of our projects are being compared to buildings of the same type. And as Emily eloquently put it, 65% of our buildings in the city of St. Louis will need to make improvements of some sort, whether that be retroactive commissioning or some sort of energy efficiency measures in order to get below that BEPS line, and that is based on our local data. So it's based on our local site EUI, and it's based on building type and everything over 50,000 square feet. So we will get into energy modeling and CDs.
All right. So we talked a little bit at module 1 and 2 about the ASHRAE 209 standard, that this just is a really good standardization of what type of modeling that you might want in the design process, what kind of feedback you're looking for, what kind of workshops you might hold and when, who should be participating or discussing, or even running the model, and in which cycles you may or may not want to include in your basic services or as additional services. So that continues all the way through design, as we've discussed in module 2, and all the way through even CDs as you wrap up design on the project. It may even continue into construction. Go ahead. So in the last module, we talked about the general requirements, load reduction modeling, and then some of these, as the standard considers them, optional design model cycles. We did talk about the last two, design integration and optimization, and energy simulation, aided value engineering as well. But it's important to note these do overlap between the concept and SD and DD phases we've already spoken about, as well as construction documents, which we're talking about today in this module. We also just touched on the as designed energy performance model. Now the 209 standard considers that a construction phase cycle, but really what it means is you're 100% done with design. Your design is complete and you're recording everything that you issued for construction. So it's kind of in that space during bidding and negotiations, that closeout of the design phase. In the construction administration phase, there are also modeling cycles for change orders, as-built energy performance, and post-occupancy energy performance comparison. These are often ad services because you don't know what you need until you get into construction administration, but we'll go through what they're for and when you might want to use them. So this is ASHRAE 209 mapped out across all of the design phases. So we've gone through concept and schematic and design development. Today we'll talk about those latter three phases, CDs, CA, and post-occupancy. And again, this is all about keeping your eye on the ball. You've set targets up with your owner prior to design. You set targets with the team during the design process and iteratively benchmark the design against those targets. And so now this is making sure that those project performance goals are executed during construction documents, become part of the construction documents, and are executed again in construction administration.
So we're gonna get into specifications a little bit. I know I think our spec writer is on the call, so I won't call them dry, but the slides are dry. We'll just establish that off the bat. But what we're really going to be sharing with you are the ways that HOK has started to include these in our specs. We're not saying this is the way that you have to do this or to, copy this verbatim, but this is a suggested pathway towards implicitly and explicitly sharing how the BEPS can influence your project and then ensuring how that's incorporated. So we're going to go through these different sections.
I think that specifications are kind of interesting myself. I think it's like the story of your project. You have the illustrations, if you will, in your drawing set. And this is the narrative. This really does tell the story of everything that goes into the building or the project and why. So I really get excited about specifications. But yes, as we said, most firms start with a master spec format, and then have their own firm-wide sort of customization layered on top of that, and then per project customization. So this again is our approach. This has got sort of that formulaic master spec with our own modifications that we would generally apply, and then layered on top of that is the language for building performance standards.
Can I add one thing before we go to the next slide?
Please.
Oh, there's a little bit of feedback, but as you guys might recall, we had in module 1 a conversation about having a sustainability workshop or energy charrette where we get all the stakeholders at the table and we talk about really what is the plan for complying with the energy performance standards. And it is really important to have a conversation about Division 1 in that meeting if the contractor is part of it. And even if the contractor is not part of it, it's important to have the conversation to get the owner invested in Division 1. Division 1 is like one of the most important divisions, but it's also one of the more controversial ones, and it's one that tends to get chopped or whittled down or excluded from contractor bids. So it's really important to have a conversation about this. And I'll just say about specifications, not to pile on Allison, but I learned really early as a construction lawyer that lawyers aren't really great at reading plans, but they're excellent at reading specifications. So it's really important to get it right.
Oh, I do not dismiss the importance of specs. I was just speaking to the slide. You know, they're not pretty pictures on these slides. This is like good content. And I will also say that the first time I was ever a PA of my own project, I worked for a much smaller firm, and specs really saved my butt more than once. And I was really grateful for them, because when I forgot something, it was always there. So yes.
So we do have a list of the different sections of Division 1 that you may want to have implicit or explicit reference to building performance standards. And when we say implicit, we'll go through that, but we feel like there are some references that might already be in your specifications that could cover BEPS, you know, building performance standards, but maybe don't call it out explicitly. But it would take education and training of your construction administration team members to make sure that they're looking for building performance attributes specifically related back to that target. Whereas in some cases we've added additional language, which we'll walk you through.
Right, so the yellow highlighted is what we think applies to BEPS that may be already existing, and the red language here is what we have added. And so right here we're looking at substitution procedures, and this is something that I don't think I would have thought to have included, you know, like 3 years ago as part of I would have related the two together. But as we are going through what we've realized, and so often happens, you know, when we're reconciling budget with our projects when they come in, is we want to VE items. And this is, so what we're highlighting here are items to make sure that we relook at things like the energy model when our products want to be, or the contractor has come back with cost saving measures and is trying to change out some of those items. So rerunning the energy model here on research evaluation energy modeling reports evidencing compliance with the building energy code and performance standard is what language we have specifically added to section A2.
I was gonna say, it's not just for VE. We know right now with some of the supply
Lead
chain
times.
issues around the world that there just may be longer lead times than anticipated, or some things may not be available at all. So sometimes these substitutions are necessary, but we still want to make sure they support the overall project goals.
I just am working on a federal project in Salt Lake City, and one of the cost saving measures was to remove the mineral wool insulation from the project. And so we were able to get the same energy code, but it was another different aspect of sustainability that we were concerned about, and had to rerun the embodied energy calculations by switching it to spray foam, which was higher, much higher than mineral wool, except that it was a very low percentage of the overall impact of the embodied energy of the building. So not totally related to BEPS, but something that we have run across recently. And then the additional language here is requested substitution provides energy performance characteristics that specified products provided for achieving the building energy performance standard. So explicitly stating it in the section under products. And then additionally, requested substitution provides energy performance characteristics that specified product providing energy. So twice, I guess,
This is
depending on which
substitutions
section.
for cause and substitutions for convenience. So there's different reasons you might have a request. You want to make sure the language appears in all of the different substitution language. But it could be a glazing unit, it could be insulation, it could be clips that hold the cladding to the building that might be thermally broken versus not thermally broken. There's all kinds of things that might be impacted by a substitution at this stage. And so you want to just make sure that there's a reference point here that says this does need to uphold not just the energy code, but the performance standard target as well.
And not just HVAC equipment because of lead times.
Right.
We have added a little bit modification here too. This is just the form, but it's the same same language as the previous slide, where proposed substitution does not affect the compliance with the building code or performance standard in effect for the project.
And this is an application for that substitution. So when the contractor is filing an application for that substitution, they are attesting by signing this form that they have already verified that the product they're asking to substitute would not alter the building's compliance or the project's compliance with the building performance standard.
Thanks, Annika. The next section we're looking at is the contract modification procedures. So again, we have some sections that we think do apply, overlap with the BEPS, but the additional language here we have added is to include an updated energy model report or summary that indicates the effect of the change on the energy performance, compliance with applicable building codes, or the building standards at the time of delivery or in the future. And
It's
let
the
me just
same
read the
language
second one.
for owner-initiated proposals or contractor-initiated proposals. So again, you'll see some repetition here, but we want to cover all our bases. The request for substitutions or change orders in this case may come either from the contractor or the client, and we want to make sure that folks are, again, just checking back against that performance standard and expected outcomes.
And then under submittal procedures, we have included it into the submittal requirements as one of the items. So the product specifications and the statement of compliance with the specified reference standards are already in there and do apply, but the language that we've added here specifically, explicitly, that applies to BEPS is the statement of compliance for the project energy performance consistent with the building performance standard section. And maybe that I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we're not necessarily asking the contractor to update the energy model in these situations, but that they know that they may be paying for the cost to run the energy model as part of the substitution request, or just that it happens.
We're trying to integrate throughout the specification language that there is an expected energy performance outcome. And if they're going to make changes or request changes to the project that might impact that anticipated outcome, the model has to be updated before a decision can be made. And again, as Allison said, the contractor doesn't need to update the model personally, but they're responsible for getting it updated and having that information supplied to any key decision makers, such as the architect and the owner.
And here we're just adding energy calculations in addition to design calculations and compliance with the specific standards, specified standards, I'm sorry. And then under the design data section here, adding language to include the energy calculations if it's applicable to the substitution. And I think that what Annika said just a little bit ago is really important. I mean, this could be clips, you know, that are not thermally broken versus something that was designed as part of a curtain wall system. It could be really minor, but affect the energy model in a negative way. And we are trying to mitigate against that. So here's an example of thermal insulation that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Under the action submittals, this is where it would be applied, and under the informational submittals, what is required.
Yeah, and so if you have any specific performance criteria for a certain product like insulation or glazing unit that you want to include in these sections, that you want to see product data that specifically calls it out for approval, it can go, if it's an action submittal, I'm looking for approval. If it's just an information submittal, you can put it in that section. But here's where you can include specific requirements for information to be submitted with products before or after a substitution request. It can be just your regular product data.
The next section that we looked at is quality requirements. And towards the end, it'd be under, well,
actually, in the quality requirements, we have a lot of our testing. So if you are doing things like enclosure commissioning, assembly testing. This is where you may want to include some of those criteria, which may be enhanced because of the performance standard and the overall performance requirements of the project. It's also consistent with the energy code and the commissioning requirements within that.
Sorry, I think our little circle got deleted here, but under pre-construction testing is where Annika brought that up here. The next section is product requirements. Under definitions, comparable product is something that we believe definitely overlaps with BEPS and in-service performance. So we're currently addressing some of those things, but under submittals is where we would see additional requirements there potentially.
Some projects we can't use proprietary specifications. Maybe it's a public or institutional project, or we're providing something that basically sets the performance standard, but we expect different comparable products to be submitted for approval. And so this is just something to note. We're not adding new language here, but this is a section which again could refer to the building performance standard and energy performance of the product. So using your specifications in this way.
And then here's some more samples of product data sheets where we might be looking for some of that thermal information and it being required.
And as Allison noted, you might be looking for multiple attributes. You might be looking for embodied carbon. You might be looking for R value. You might also be looking for emissions and air quality data. So it's important to be looking across all of those attributes that you've included in your specification, particularly when there is a substitution request.
One that came up in a meeting today was sound, and we had a lunch and learn today about sound quality and transfer of sound. So always measuring things against multiple data points. So substitution requests is this part of this section, and we're highlighting that detailed comparison of significant qualities of proposed substitutions of the work and research evaluations. And what we added in this section here is evaluation reports evidencing compliance with building code or performance standard. And in effect for the project from model code organization, and then adding local code or building performance standard development body is acceptable to the authorities having jurisdiction.
And we note that because sometimes the buildings department and the jurisdictions are working isn't setting the standard nor necessarily evaluating compliance with the standard. So we don't want to just refer to model code bodies or the buildings department. We want to make sure that we've added enough language to sufficiently cover the different entities within a jurisdiction that may be enforcing the building performance standard and setting the standard in the first place.
Thanks, Annika. And then in addition, we're just highlighting the architect's action statement and reminding that the standard specs also include that the architect is the sole judge of equality and acceptability, and that is included and would apply to the building energy performance standard. And then under comparable products, we're also looking at will produce the indicated results. And then also it is included in the standard detailed comparison of significant qualities of proposed product with those in name specification. And then significant qualities include attributes such as performance, weight, size, durability, visual effect, and specific features. So again, measuring against multiple attributes of these products, but reminding that we have the ultimate say in whether that gets included. Annika, am I taking over yours here, or
I can talk through this, but if you are working on a LEED project, you've probably already seen this section for sustainable design requirements, and this often includes LEED meetings and action submittals, LEED requirements for sustainable products. And so this is something that can be aligned with building performance standards. If you want to go ahead. But we actually created a new section that can go into our specifications in addition to, or when it's not a lead project, all on its own. And it references back to the language Donovan has spoken about, with the E204, the owner architect agreement, with our architect consultant agreements, but making sure that these same terms that we've already defined with our owner and our consultants are now defined in a contract document for the general contractor and their subs. And so there's a reference back to compliance period, building performance compliance, building performance reporting, et cetera. We think it's really important to get all of that language replicated here in this contract document for the construction of the project.
And this example references DC code, but of course I'm going to be utilizing it soon and adapting it for St. Louis, actually on 2 upcoming projects.
And most importantly, at the end of this section, we included a summary of the energy model report, the final as designed energy model report. You can attach an entire energy report if you'd like. But in this case, a summary that says, here were the modeled, kilowatt hours, BTUs, site energy use intensity, source energy use intensity, greenhouse gas emissions, energy cost, annual energy cost, and annual energy use, targets, Energy Star Target Finder score, whatever outputs you think are important, putting those in the contract document as a point of reference. So when the contractor says, I have a substitution request, you can say, show me that the project won't use more than this budget of allocated energy, or won't emit more carbon, won't impact the site EUI, won't impact the annual energy cost. You show me, but you're defining here those parameters that they have to stay within, the guardrails they have to stay within in order to get an approved request. And so it's important to include this in the actual contract documents, that not as something exterior or external to that.
And I think the last item here is kind of interesting, but energy performance project progress requirements concurrent with each application for payment, submit reports comparing the actual construction and purchasing activities with the energy performance action plans. So very stringent on the contractor, and hopefully we can get that language in some of our
And we've used this on a project. We have a hospital going up in DC. We did include this in our draft spec, got a little pushback, but we really, doubled down on it and said, look, if in 5 or 10 years this project doesn't meet the performance standard, fingers are going to get pointed. We don't want to be in that situation. We want to make sure that we're keeping our eye on the ball throughout design and construction. After delivery, this is going to be an operations issue, but during design and construction, we want to have all the guardrails in place to make sure the project is positioned to perform the way anticipated at the end of design, that we're setting it up for success under the performance standard. So after that, they kept the language in.
And it really is about mitigating risk. How much cheaper is it to energy model a few extra rounds than to be out of BEPS compliance? I mean, I think that is what we remind our contractors at those moments.
So some of the modeling that might help support keeping our eye on the ball during construction include that change order model and as-built model. An as-built will come at the end of construction, and the change order could happen on an as-needed basis. Go ahead. So change order modeling cycle defined in the 209 standard is what it sounds like, but when you have a substantial substitution request that you think might materially impact the performance outcomes of the project, and that could be unavailability of materials or products, long lead times, client-led changes, maybe it's just a preference, it could be value engineering, keeping the project on budget. We know escalation's been an issue of late. Any of those changes that might lead to that potential impact on project performance. This is a change order model is defined in ASHRAE 209, and it's basically making sure if you were to proceed with the change order, does it continue to comply with our performance expectations, or does it deviate too much for us to be able to approve it? So it's validating performance before you make that decision. And so we do think it's important to coordinate this with commissioning and enclosure commissioning, making sure that your commissioning team is a part of, the review of the model outcome or output, discussing those changes. They were part of the design process, and so making sure they're part of this in construction is important as well. And if you need to update your testing requirements, if there's a different assembly, for example, and making sure that everyone's on the same page, and if there's any unanticipated conflicts or issues that might arise from that change, that you've just got that additional set of eyes on it. One of the things I highlighted there, if you want to go back for just a second, as I said throughout the design stage, really important to document and communicate. And if an owner decides that they don't want to see an updated model, they want a change approved, or they get the output of the model and it says it's going to negatively impact building performance, but they want you to approve it anyway, document that direction, document the conclusion that was, this will not, either was not modeled at the owner's direction, or it was modeled and we think it might negatively impact energy performance. And we have said so, but we've decided to proceed anyway. But document it, communicate it, circulate it, meeting minutes, send a letter to the owner, making sure that everyone is aware that this might have an outcome, an impact on the building performance standard compliance down the road. Hopefully this curbs any of those decisions, but if not, at least there's a record of when they were made and why they were made. And then finally, just as at the end of design, we had a 100% design model. This is basically as-built energy performance. If there's not a lot of changes in the project design during CA, you may not need this, but sometimes there are. And we do a lot of research facilities where there's, at the beginning of construction, there's still a lot of shell space, but as we're getting through construction, they identify tenants or partners, and we start designing that shell space and fitting it out. And so the design has changed quite a bit along the way in the construction process. So by the end of construction, we actually have a substantially different understanding of the building than we did when we went into construction. So that's one example. There's other examples where you may have additional information or changes to the design, changes in use, changes in tenant expectations. Maybe you thought it was going to be one type of tenant, but you ended up getting a grocery store on the lower level of the building, what have you. There's something to update and have an as-built performance model so that you understand how that building was built. Also, if you accepted a lot of those change orders, just collecting all of them in one as-built model so you understand what that total picture looks like.
Yeah, we see this often in kind of the Cortex projects where we don't know what the makeup of the office to lab will be, and it can change significantly over the course of that. But then that could help us with that benchmarking and figuring out what the makeup is, so that when we start reporting for BEPS, or when the owner does with the Energy Star, we know what that makeup is and what the baseline should be.
So once that model is run, again, this would be great to have an update with your O&M team, the owner, the commissioning team, just understanding if there's any changes on how the building should be operated or maintained, any changes in expectation about building performance. So this would be before you have measured performance data. This is, as you're turning over the building, as you're delivering it, just so everyone knows what to anticipate. This is sort of problem seeking, before there could be an issue, rather than waiting, till the tail end of a year or two's of performance to find out. So this is usually performed at the end of CA or very early post-occupancy turnover timeframe.
So we talked a little bit about this in the last presentation, but just a reminder, with commissioning, what's required here in St. Louis, we are under ICC 2018, so fundamental commissioning is required, and as compared to kind of enhanced commissioning, what we do under LEED or projects that just require it, and where they fall overlaid on the ASHRAE modeling. This is located in IACC 2018 under the air leakage requirements, the air barrier compliance options, and then the commissioning plan has to be established, and systems adjusting and balancing. Commissioning report has to be issued in order to get occupancy.
And finally, if you do have some occupancy data, and if you may or may not be pursuing enhanced commissioning under your third-party rating system, but if you are keeping your eye on sort of performance data over that first year or so, some people will actually update their model with a post-occupancy energy performance comparison. So here's what I had at the end of design, here's what I had at the end of construction, and now that it's actually in operations, let me see if I have all the information I need in my model to continue to manage energy performance in an ongoing way. This could reflect changes in tenant leases or fit outs, changes of use or occupant behavior, weather, hours of operation, plug loads, meters and sub-meters, et cetera. The other thing we'd say is at turnover, we highly recommend that you recommend to your clients that they register for Energy Star Portfolio Manager as quickly as possible. Just start laying your data into Portfolio Manager month after month. It's really useful to compare your building to its peers to see if it is performing within the range, not just of the modeled expectation, but of peer buildings and their performance, as well as making sure it stays in compliance with the building performance standard. And so sometimes there's really great data. I mentioned in Module 2 this inpatient mental health facility we did it for the state of Oregon. And then this is one where we had leveraged some really unique strategies with setbacks, code variances, demand controlled ventilation and lighting in patient rooms. And so when we modeled it, it had modeled out at a 90 kBTU per square foot per year site energy use intensity. After it was delivered and it was fully operational, it was performing at half that, at about 45 kBTU per square foot per year. And it turns out that the patients were spending so much time out of their rooms, participating in group activities and other things, that their rooms really were turning down the way they were designed to, but at a rate far higher than what we had anticipated in the model. So we got really good feedback by comparing the actual performance to our design expectations. And then that helps us in the design of future facilities, but it also helps the owner understand why it's behaving differently than expected.
And just a reminder of the owner requirements here, we mentioned it too on the ASHRAE, but overlay, but benchmarking is required. It's annually reported. I think May 4th is the date. I could be wrong. And BEPS starts May 4th as well. So that data goes into the system.
So if you are entering that data, and again, your post-occupancy performance isn't what you expected, leveraging that model, as we mentioned, to identify using this now as a problem-solving tool. I don't meet BEPS, what do I do? Use that post-occupancy energy performance comparison to identify in which ways your performance, your actual performance, doesn't align with the model. And that can kind of help you hone in on some fine-tuning and tweaking that you might want to do. We did show at the end of Module 2 some of the ways in which we see buildings not perform as expected and some of the reasons. And so we talked about some of the design strategies that might help, like submetering and the O&M, sort of the enhanced commissioning where you're doing peer reviews of the design, updating your energy model more regularly. In post-occupancy or, as you're leasing the building, we'd say we highly recommend owners in these jurisdictions with BEPS do look at their lease language and maybe update their lease language to support a responsible tenant energy management. There's two players when it comes to BEPS. There's the base building and then the owner of the building and those core HVAC and lighting systems. But there's the tenant and all of their fit out, their systems, their lighting, their plug loads. And so some kind of recognition in the lease agreement for that breakdown and who's responsible when things go awry. We do recommend that Energy Star Portfolio Manager is updated regularly, even if it's quarterly, but not waiting till the end of the year to cram it all in, at the end of April, right before your May 4th deadline. We recommend the owners that O&M training that you might have done for LEED or you might have done for your commissioning requirement, that it's updated every 18 to 24 months. You know, it's not something that you can do one and done, and people operating the building, you know, expect that training to last a lifetime. You have staff turnover, but people often, you know, won't remember what they learned. If they learned during one season, they might not remember all the steps to take during other seasons. So it's good to update that training to refresh it periodically. And things like filter logs, maintenance logs are really helpful, you know, just so that you have a record of when things are done. You know, clogged filter can increase your fan energy use. All kinds of little things can trip you up on building performance. And frankly, we recommend retro commissioning every 5 years. If you want to have a well-tuned building that's operating at its optimum, retro commissioning is something that should be done regularly. And it doesn't take that much when you are doing it regularly. It's a building that's gone really far off the rails where retro commissioning is a bigger undertaking, but when you're doing it, you know, systematically every few years, it's really not as much of a lift. We do, if you are doing LEED, recommend enhanced commissioning because there is a 10-month revisit to the site, and you're making sure the commissioning authority is making sure that building is performing as anticipated and can help the owner identify any issues that may have arisen or things that maybe aren't, you know, controls that weren't set, set points that weren't set properly, other things that may just not be conforming with design intent, and so they can help do that tweaking. And we recommend the good old occupant comfort survey during the warranty period. If that survey is conducted during the equipment warranty period, first of all, the occupants of the building are like thousands of sensors that can help identify when something's not working properly. And then if you identify a problem during the warranty period, you can actually get that taken care of. But if you wait and you don't do that survey at all, or you do it much later than the end of that period, then you may not have any recourse but undertaking that maintenance yourself or replacement. So, and then we recommend that, you know, if you do get a copy of that model with building turnover, that if you are making other major changes to the building, you may want to periodically update that energy model. So it's kind of a living document or living model so that you continue to have an understanding of how the building should perform. And if it gets too far off, you can bring it back into alignment.
I think that doing the occupant survey in that time period is one of probably the biggest indicators there of things operating correctly. And then we reviewed this last time, but I'm going to have Annika just go over them again. I don't know if you all know this, but Annika helped get this legislation passed and presented before Congress on this. So she is a good authority on what the contents are of this legislation.
Yeah, there are incentives now. They're going to be state and local incentives, so definitely check with your local utility, as well as, you know, city or state incentives. But under the Inflation Reduction Act, if you're building, you know, multifamily, single family as well, but for the first time, multifamily homes can apply for the Section 45L home builder tax credit. And so, you know, per unit, you're eligible for up to $2,500 if you meet the Energy Star requirements, and $5,000 per unit for meeting DOE's Zero Energy Ready program. So it's a huge incentive to design a great building from the get-go. And Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready have things with, you know, air leakage testing and duct leakage testing, whole building and duct. Insulation inspections. There's all kinds of great things there to help make sure the building is positioned to perform well, and here's money to make sure that you can afford to do that. This goes into effect January 1st of next year, and it's been extended for 10 years. So this is available for quite some time if you are undertaking multifamily projects. 179D, the old tax credit only went up to $180 a foot, and this is for commercial buildings, non-residential. And now it's up to $250 to $5 a foot. For new construction, this is based on a 25 to 50% reduction from the ASHRAE 90.1 standard, and that will be an evolving 90.1. You know, the floor will continue to move as the standard continues to update rather than being static at one point in time as it has been in the past. But if you're doing a retrofit, let's say you do have a building that doesn't comply with BEPS and you're going to renovate it in order to make it comply with BEPS, then this $250 to $5 a foot is for a 25 to 50% improvement over the existing building performance, which you have documented because you've been benchmarking. So this is a permanent tax credit. It does not expire. This goes on forever. Per the current legislation. So this is a pretty good deal. It is actually easier to qualify for this as an existing building than new construction. Once again, this goes into effect January 1st of the next new year, and then you should be able to use it any year thereafter. Just keep in mind that ASHRAE, the ASHRAE baseline for new construction will continue to update over time, but for existing buildings, you're comparing against that building's own past performance. And there's also additional incentives for things like EV infrastructure. So if you want to install EV-ready infrastructure, EV charging stations, you can get up to 30% of those expenses covered, up to $100,000. So that's pretty exciting as well. We know decarbonization, electrification are starting to be very popular with new construction or major retrofits. Here's a way to make your building EV ready.
And as I learned just recently, it is required in the city of St. Louis. I think it's 2% of all parking spaces if you have over 50, and that have to be EV, and 5% have to be EV ready, I believe.
And it doesn't, the federal tax incentives don't care if you're required to do this locally or not, they're still available to your project. We had that asked on one webinar. And then the clean electricity tax credit expands the investment tax credit for clean energy investments and combined heat and power, solar, geothermal. This also includes microgrid and energy storage technology, dynamic glass or electrochromic glass. And then starting in 2025, this will convert to a technology neutral structure with a similar incentive structure just based on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So up to 30% of the cost of the project of the technology you're installing. This is the first time energy storage has shown up or microgrid. Something I didn't note with 179D, if the client, the building owner is institutional or nonprofit, government sector, doesn't have a tax liability, that credit can convey to their design professionals. And this section 48, if it's an institutional client, this can be a direct incentive to them, or a not-for-profit, no tax liability client. This is something that can be a direct incentive rather than a tax credit. And so there's a couple of things that have really improved, and I believe the IRS still has a call for comments open for anyone who'd like to comment on these tax incentives right now. You can still do that, I believe, for a little bit longer. So they're taking feedback from the industry.
Annika's question, do you anticipate this being calculated by us, kind of as the design industry, or do you think these greenhouse gas emissions will be, calculated by the supplier, like Sage Glass?
I mean, typically, like with 179D, we'll have an energy model that we have used for design and code compliance. And then a tax attorney takes that model and uses it to apply for the credit. Our client's tax attorney or ours if it's conveying to us. If it's a greenhouse gas emission reduction, anytime you run an energy model like an Energy Plus or eQuest, you also get GHG emissions in that model or can easily convert. You can also get them in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. The IRS website should have a little bit more update on what they're looking for. But typically this is taking data that you probably already have in your energy model, and then whomever is actually filing the taxes for that client would use the data in their application. So we're not expecting design professionals to apply for the tax credits per se, but information they might already be collecting as part of the design process would feed into that.
So really everything we talked about today, all those extra steps will be easily paid for by the savings here. And these are just some references, the resources where all this information came from. And it was recorded for Zoom, and the passcode will be available when we send this out as well.
Yeah, that last webinar is a IRA-specific webinar that the ARA and USGBC gave, and so you can go visit that. I think that should be hyperlinked in the slide deck that you get access to, and that's the passcode. But Incentifind and Desire USA are for any incentives. You can look by location and get local, state, and federal incentives for your project. So those are really good databases to research.
And that is it. So our contact information is here. We are available if you have questions. We can open up for questions before we end today. We are on time. Yeah, I can't see the chat, so if there were any.
You can take the screen down if you want. That way we can see everybody, and anybody wants to ask a question can do that out loud or in the chat.
It won't go big. Lucy
How do we get the decks from all three presentations? They should be posted on the St. Louis Building Energy Exchange website. I don't know how long it'll take for all of them to get posted there, but I think we said 1 was already posted and 2 is in the process of being posted.
Yes, so I assume they will be sending out, I'm going to say that for Malachi, to the group, the same email serve that sent you the information for today's. We'll send a link to all of those when we get them up. So they should be available. And what was the E204? Is that right? That document.
We can upload a copy of the E204 that we modified the AIA, so that was fine for us to share that. Again, it's for you to modify for yourselves or another contract. This is just meant to be an example of how you can incorporate BEPS language into a contract document.
Correct.
And just to follow up with what Allison was saying, we will have everything up really quickly. The page is up. We have on the Building Energy Exchange St. Louis website, if you go to our resources tab, we have an AEC tab. So for architectural engineering construction side of things, as opposed to building owners, we'll have resources for people to be able to, help inform their decisions, including these wonderful presentations. So thank you again to HOK and the three of you for sharing this knowledge with everybody. And also for everyone else, please keep an eye out. Next week on the 26th, there is a session put together by the Building Performance Partnership on the Inflation Reduction Act. So you can sign up for that for free. It's a midday session, so it should be really good. And thanks to Annika for the hard work and presentation getting that done.
If you guys want, Malachi, if you want to put the link to the AEC resource page, maybe in the chat, that might be helpful.
Katarina,
yeah, no,
I think you had a question you raised.
Oh, yes, I just want to thank you so much for a great session. And thank you, Allison, for emphasizing that the year 2024 is our evaluation or verification year. Time is ticking away. So this is a good time to think about all energy improvements on existing buildings and new ones. So thank you for emphasizing that.
Scheduling. Now is the time to schedule things like retroactive commissioning early next year so you can realize those energy savings. To be in compliance when the deadline drops, because it will be 2024 that you're measured against.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks for drilling it into my head. It took a while. Okay.
So we have a couple links up in the chat if anybody needs them to find the IRA webinar coming up next week, as well as the resources for these modules that we've recorded.
Awesome. I don't think I can pull up the chat from this thing. I will actually stop recording this time. I think I didn't stop it last time and it recorded for like 32 hours of blank space. So we will make sure that doesn't happen this time. We had to cut it down. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.